To start the conversation, I'm going to be introducing two amazing women who have been actively engaged in this topic for quite a number of years. After we hear from our two speakers, we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion. The screen is going to go up. We're going to have a bit of a panel discussion. And at about 1 o'clock, I'd like to open it up to the audience. And I'll be giving you some further notice about that we have a microphone down here, and we'll be asking people to come forward, identify yourself. If you have an introduction to your question, keep it fairly brief, because we'd like to get through as many questions as possible. So we would like to get some turnover, but we do want to hear from you as well. That's what this is all about. It is a dialogue, it is a forum, and the panel is really here to share their tremendous experiences, quite diverse experiences, but also to respond to and interact with the discussion in the audience. So it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce our first speaker and panelist this morning. I guess it's now this afternoon. Dr. Marie Delorme is CEO of the Imagination Group of Companies. She's Vice Chair of the Mount Royal University Board of Governors and has served on numerous boards and co-chaired the 2010 Calgary United Way campaign. Her awards include the Alberta Centennial Medal, University of Calgary Dr. Douglas Cardinal Award, the Alberta Chamber of Commerce Business Award of Distinction, Calgary Chamber of Commerce Salute to Excellence Award, and the Métis Nation Entrepreneurial Leadership Award. Marie holds a Bachelor of Science degree, a Master's of Business Administration from Queen's University, and a PhD from the University of Calgary. Her research focuses on intercultural leadership. Fascinating woman. I'll introduce you to Marie Delorme. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you very much. It truly is an honor to be here with you today for this very special week of celebrations of multiculturalism and human rights. I want to set the stage for the panel discussion by taking about 5 minutes to answer a question that we are often asked, and that question is, why are we even talking about Aboriginal issues today? Why are we dealing with the social issues that too often make the news? So in 5 minutes, I'm going to condense 500 years of history for you. And if any of my students from the University of Calgary are here, my sincere apologies for taking 12 weeks to do this normally. So when we talk about the history of Aboriginal people with Canada, we often talk about it in 3 eras. At the time of contact with Europeans, we often talk about that as a time of collaboration. And that was very soon followed with a very long, very dark era. And we are now in what we call a time of healing and reconciliation. So what did this land look like prior to European contact? Well, in Europe, they had a doctrine called the doctrine of terra nullius. And if any of you remember your Latin, terra is earth and nullus means nothing. And the doctrine indicated that there was certainly something in North America, but they were not people. They were savages. But in fact, when the Europeans came to North America, what they found was this. This is a map from National Geographic and its tribal and linguistic groups across North America. When the Europeans came here, there were between 50 and 100 million people that inhabited North and Central America. There were sophisticated systems, judicial systems, social systems, military systems, but they were not European systems. Trade routes crossed North America, north and south and east and west. We have archaeological evidence of that. We have oral history. The Dene in the northern part of our country share a common dialect with the Navajo from Arizona. So I want to give you a little bit of a history lesson that you may or may not remember. In the mid-1700s, a royal proclamation came from the Crown, and what it was intended to do was to set the stage for respectful treaty negotiations with the Indigenous people in Canada, and it was intended to protect the status of Indian people and to protect their ways of life, and it was characterized by non-interference. This is a map of the treaties across Canada, and our treaties are a bit different from the US. Our treaties are treaties of peace. The treaties in the United States were treaties of war. So the treaties were intended to open the land for settlement and were characterized by the sharing of the land between Indigenous people and the settlers. This picture is a fellow named Frank Pedley, and he was the deputy superintendent. My apologies for that. I must have some kind of magnetism here that's causing this. He historically is quoted as saying the purpose of the treaties, there was one purpose, and that was to forever extinguish Indian title to the land. But you will recall that Indigenous people did not have a written language. So their understanding of the treaties were that they were agreements to share the land, to live in peace, and that the commissioners who were making promises on behalf of the Crown were doing so honorably. But the commissioners, when they came back to Manitoba in 1899 after negotiating some of the treaties in Western Canada, they filed a report, and their report said that the Indian people stipulated that there was to be no interference with their lives, their religious beliefs. They said that it would have been impossible to have made treaties if they had not solemnly assured the Indian people that there was never an intention of interfering with them or confining them to reserves. So this is the assurances that they gave, and this is what the understanding was. But in fact, what is written, and here's an excerpt from Treaty 8, it says, the Indians do hereby cede, release, and forever surrender and yield up their lands. While the commissioners were traveling across Western Canada, extinguishing collective Indian title to the land, they were doing the same with Métis, which was an individualistic type of extinguishing to title. And they were doing that through something called scrip. And scrip was essentially a deed or a piece of paper that a Métis individual or family could, in effect, trade in for land or for money. The scrip you see in the corner is my family scrip, which is signed by my grandfather. In 1885, his name was Alex Delorme. It identifies him as a half-breed from the town of St. Norbert in Manitoba, and certainly when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, that was a term that was in very common usage. Louis Riel, as you know, was hanged in 1885 by the very same government that recognized him 100 years later as one of the founding fathers of Confederation. So what happened? How did Aboriginal people go from thousands of years of prosperity, having the kind of systems that were in place, to what we have today? Well, I want to tell you briefly about a couple of very important pieces in history. The treaties were signed in the late 1800s for the most part. There are modern-day treaties as well. But in 1857, one of the most destructive pieces of legislation was passed in our country, and it was called the Gradual Civilizations Act. It was inspired by the church. It identified Aboriginal culture as inferior. It stripped Aboriginal people of their citizenship. And the definition that you see on the screen, which existed for over 100 years, was that an Indian was an uncivilized person, destitute of the knowledge of God and of any fixed and clear belief in religion. And then the Indian Act, which I think you probably all know of. We hear about it in the news often enough. The Indian Act was amended many, many times over the years since it was created in 1876. To this day, it informs many, many aspects of life for First Nations people. And I've just put some highlights here. It was illegal for more than 3 men to assemble. You couldn't travel off reserve without a pass, to practice spirituality, to practice culture. It was illegal to join the military or enlist. And some of the amendments were made, took away further rights. If an Indian group of people lived near a town of more than 8,000 people, the town could petition to have that group moved legally. And In the early part of the 1900s, the Indian Act was amended to override the treaties, and this is fundamentally what's behind some of the arguments we have now with land claim issues. My father, who was born in 1882, could not legally purchase alcohol until the 1970s, and he died in 1965. And I mentioned that it was illegal to join the military and enlist, and despite that, legions of Aboriginal men and women fought in all of the great wars. And here are just some photos that I have selected from historical archives. The fellow in the upper right-hand corner is Theodore Delorme. He is my father's younger brother, and he was a munitions expert. He fought at Passchendaele. When these people came back from the wars, they were disenfranchised because they had to give up their status to fight. They were not citizens of Canada, and they did not have veterans benefits when they came back. And then the final blow, residential schools. The purpose of residential schools was to destroy Aboriginal Indigenous culture in this country, as it was in places like Australia and New Zealand. And a secondary objective was to assimilate Aboriginal people. The young people who attended these schools, over 139 schools across Canada, were denied connection with their culture, their language, their very identity. The very act of removing a child from its home is an act of violence. These children were emotionally abused, they were physically abused, and in many cases they were sexually abused. Treatment was harsh, and it's very difficult to be removed from your family. This is a map of the 139 residential schools and a list of the churches that ran them. These were legislated schools. This is what we're left with. This is the legacy of residential schools. We have the highest rate of poverty in this country. We have the highest rates of suicide in the world. Substance abuse. The lifespan of Indigenous people in our country is much less than the rest of the population. When you remove children from their home, generation after generation after generation, this is what happens. What happened to Aboriginal people and what we're facing today is not cultural. And that's an important point, I repeat, it is not cultural. If you were to do this to any group of people, any place, this is what would result. And this is the legacy that we are dealing with today. How do we learn to love? We learn to love by growing up in a loving family. We learn to live in healthy, productive societies by being brought up in that. And when that is denied, this is what we are left with. One of my favorite quotes is by Mahatma Gandhi, and he was asked what he thought of Western civilization. And Gandhi said, "I think it would be a good idea." So where are we now? We're in a period of healing and reconciliation. Each of the churches who were involved in the residential schools have made their apologies. The Roman Catholic Church, who ran most of the schools, was the last to apologize. The RCMP, who enforced these laws, offered their sincere apologies. And in 2009, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was struck, and it is on a 5-year mission to record the stories so they are never forgotten, and this is part of the healing that we are in. This is a quote that I have on my refrigerator, and it's tattered and torn after many years. Martin Luther King said that when we have information, we have an obligation to talk about what we know, to educate other people, and that's what human rights are about, because so many people misunderstand. I just read in Macleod's magazine on the plane last night that 64% of Canadians believe that Indigenous people get too much money. Martin Luther King said that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter, and we should never be silent about things that matter. Thank you very much.
Going to raise the screen. We're just hiding the table behind you. thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Maria. I think it speaks to the core of our discussion today, and a really important backdrop and context within which we can have our discussion today that I'm very much looking forward to. I'd now like to introduce another woman who is doing some amazing things. I've learned, by the way, a long time ago, as a man, if you want to get things done, you want to change things, ask women to do it, and that's why we have 2 women panelists, and I'm just pointing people in the right direction. So I know my role very well. But Christy is a proud First Nations woman from the Bonaparte Band, which is part of the Shuswap Nation in British Columbia. She holds a degree in social work from the University of Calgary and is the current acting director of the Calgary Urban Aboriginal Initiative. She has been employed with the Calgary Urban Aboriginal Initiative since 2002 and enjoys working with urban Aboriginal, the broader urban Aboriginal community. Christy was named one of the top 40 under 40 by Avenue Magazine in 2011. She sits on a variety of committees, including Corrections Services Canada, Citizens Advisory Committee, United Way of Calgary's Full Circle Implementation Team, and is the current chair of the Calgary Workers Resource Centre. Does a fantastic job, and it's great to have you with us, Christy. And I think you're just going to deliver your comments from the table, and we have a mic there, and I'll just join the 2 of them at the table. And when Christy is finished, we'll open it up for a bit of panel discussion, and then we will open it up to the audience. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. It's great to see such a great audience here today. Thank you, Marie, for your introduction and orientation into this day. I think today is going to be a real good time in having this discussion. I'll be speaking mostly from an urban perspective, given that some of the work and some of the things that we do at the Calgary Urban Aboriginal Initiative, but I'll also be making reference to some of personal aspects, being a First Nations person living here in this city as well. Marie did a wonderful job of giving us some overall historical context. And being an urban center, as we all know, we're very multicultural, having to understand different groups, different languages, different religions, and finding that way. It's even more so when working in the Aboriginal population. As Marie said, there's over 600 different bands here in Canada. And Calgary, we have a wide variety of people that we come in contact with. And over the years in being employed with Kauai, I've had the great fortune of being able to meet a wide variety of people from all over Canada, from the States, even the world. And although we all come from different places, I think there are some fundamental agreements that we can all come on from an Aboriginal perspective. And human rights is an area that I think most people are quite hesitant to talk about at times. And one of the ideas behind the Calgary Urban Aboriginal Initiative was creating forums or opportunities for people to come together and have dialogues, have discussions, learn from each other, and make actionable steps forward in these areas. One of the areas that I can speak from is our human rights domain that began in 2005. It's a group of people that are just like you, everyone in the audience here. They'd be open and free to anyone to come out and participate, and having those discussions and saying what things are impacting our community. How do we have those discussions in a meaningful way that people aren't afraid to ask questions? Often we run into people who often come up to us and say,